This is Andrew Bragg, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
That's right. You are watching the Break It Down show. Just a couple of combat dudes talking about combat stuff. And look, it's amazing to me that in our time, probably more than any generation before, we're able to deploy and almost immediately start writing, or even writing during our deployment. When was your book born?
So I started writing my book probably 2 years ago. I
Okay.
spent the last year working with the publishers to get it published, but the whole writing process for me started probably November, December of 2022.
Okay.
Um, so I what I initially did is I kind of asked the guys in my platoon permission to write this book because
Right.
there was a lot of hesitation in the past. We were approached by journalists and stuff like that to kind of tell our story, and that was when the wounds were still pretty fresh, and we didn't want to. We didn't want to have anything to do with that valley, and yeah. But 12, fast forward 12 years later, there was a book that came out about Bravo Company, and I read that book, and it brought back all the sights, the smells, the sounds, and
Yeah.
I was like, man, we we got to tell our story. So I reached out to the guys in my platoon, as many of them as I could, as many of them as I stayed in contact with on Facebook, and I just kind of asked. I was like, hey guys, like, what do you think about me telling our
Right.
story? And they were all on board. I think it might have been because it was one of us telling the story and not just some
Mm.
journalist. But yeah, they were all on board. So I started the journey of traveling around the country and reuniting with these guys, collecting our stories, interviewing them, doing recordings,
Yeah.
and that was about from January to April and of 2023, and then from then till the end of 2023, I uh, I started writing. So it took me about 6 months to listen to all the interviews, take notes, get all the chapters down. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I went to the local library with the rest of the homeless population and just started writing. And when I was done, I reached. Yeah, I had constant support by the guys the whole time, but it was
Right.
really important to me that they gave me the thumbs up. That I told our story
Yeah.
well and told it right. So I had them read my first manuscript, my first draft, and yeah, I went from there and got a publishing deal, and we've been working with the publisher this year to get it out, and it's coming out October 15th. So yeah, it's become a reality.
Yeah. Well, congratulations. Everybody who wants to get the book, it's called Devil's Playground. There's the link down below. It's about a nasty part of Afghanistan. And so you and I were talking before the show. Did I read the book? And I think you'll recognize this. So for the audience, we worked in a similar area, the same river, but I also worked in other valleys, and I bounced around a little bit more. But it's different worlds altogether. When I'm reading the book, it's challenging for me, man, because one, I want to inject myself into your guys' mission so I can help because I'm good at war. You're good at war, and so like I have this need to do that, even though you can't. I also have the wounds that you carry from my own part of the war, and I'm still tender, more tender than I realized when I was reading it. And so it was for me a hard read emotionally, and plus my just so many images are just flooding through my mind that it is the book is great. It's well written, it's well crafted, and everything else. But for someone who's been there or been somewhere like there, it's challenging because it's triggering for me. It really is, and it's been a long time since I've been in a combat zone. But that day to day grind, the mistakes we make, the things that happened in spite of our, it's a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah, it's I mean, that's what the same experience I had when I read the Bravo Company book by Ben Kessling. it brought back the sights, the sounds, the smells.
Yeah.
And that was the valley that I was in. But I mean, yeah, anyone who's been through combat, that experience, and you can relate to our story.
Yeah.
The Arghandab River Valley, which is where we were during this deployment, that was like such a different place. I deployed with the 173rd before I deployed with the 82nd. So I did some time in the mountains of Afghanistan in Paktika province. And the fighting there was hellacious as well. I mean, we got ambushed by over 150 guys at one point. Um, we would constantly be fighting guys that were crossing the Pakistan border. So I mean, I was well versed in combat, but the combat we saw in the Arghandab River Valley was so different because
Mm.
of their use of IEDs and landmines. It severely limited our freedom of movement. So, you get in an ambush, and you not only have to worry about, oh, these guys are shooting at us from less than 50 feet away, you also have to worry about, oh man, I can't really run because I have to watch every step I take.
Yeah.
So just limiting the freedom of movement, it was such a different fight. And I mean, I'm sure you can attest to this, that every area in Afghanistan they have different,
So different.
tactics and procedures, and it's a different fight everywhere.
Yeah.
So just the ability to adapt and overcome. But this story is about that fight in the Arghandab, and like how they were using the same tactics as they were in the 80s with the Russians. We didn't know this at the time. The literature wasn't available to us, but
Yeah. Yeah.
since our time in 2009, 2010, there's been writings from like the Russians, and they've
Yeah.
made publications of books, and you read these books, and it's like, holy shit, man, these guys are doing the same stuff that they were
Uh-huh.
doing to us.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, which was like litter the area with IEDs, and set up close ambushes.
It's again like we're the same type of job, go out, patrol, interdict or whatever it's going to be, and but different terrain. So you guys had vehicles. You couldn't operate a vehicle where we were at. It was so rugged it would break. And one of the things, like almost right away, I'm reading in the book and I'm thinking about the distance and the time it takes to do things. And so, in TV, like the bomb squad shows up in 20 minutes. You and I both know, like that's just like you're really doing that out there. You're doing that yourself. There's no bomb squad coming. But
Yeah.
the time it takes. And so if you get ambushed for whatever reason, you stay ambushed until that ambush is over,
Yeah,
and
the
that's just how that is.
the EOD assets, when they were available, they had to be escorted out to us, and
Right.
that takes time. And yeah, when you're in an ambush, you have your QRF coming, but it's the Arghandab was so heavily vegetated. It consisted of grape fields and pomegranate orchards. So
Right.
we kind of jokingly said it was like Vietnam. It was a jungle. So yeah, we did
Yeah.
have vehicles, but we couldn't use them in the valley. Our vehicles were really just
Right.
used for like supply runs. When we ran out of food or ran out of ammo, we would go resupply
Right.
like
Yeah.
once a month. Really, we were doing foot patrols in the orchards and in the grape fields, and like it was like walking through Vietnam. Like you couldn't see more than 50 feet. So yeah, you might get ambushed, 2 kilometers away from the outpost, but
Yeah.
that 2 kilometers you might as well be on the moon,
I,
because
I was
it's
going to
gonna
say the word the moon. Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. Let,
like
let me let me just paint a picture here with you real quick because you said the word QRF. So anybody doesn't know, that's quick reaction force. Just remove the Q. They're a reaction force. And look, I'm going to tell you from the point of view of my cop. You're going to fill in the details for your area, but where we were at, there's actually a JSS. But if you were a mile and a half away, we couldn't move freely, right? We had influence wherever we were, but if they chose to attack our influence, or just from our post, maybe half a mile, weapons range was really the standoff. And so if you were a mile and a half away, by the time, and we got radios, hey, we need help. By the time they got the reaction force spun up and out to you, because it was all rugged, you weren't going to move fast. And one thing that people understand is we're at an extreme altitude, and if you run to that fight and you get there and you're completely fagged out for 5 minutes. You got to put your hands on your knees, which is not because people aren't out of shape. It's because it's so rough carrying all that weight. You get to the fight and you're not prepared to fight. Same thing with going over the mountains or anything you're doing. You're picking along at a deliberate pace so that if something does happen, you are the quick reaction force, because it's going to be you and whoever's there. And you and I both, we don't carry that much ammo on these things. Heck, in my job, I've got a pistol and a couple magazines. The only thing I'm carrying is some extra weight for the guy carrying the water blivet. So quick reaction forces and response times, it's not what you would see necessarily in your mind or on TV.
Yeah, no, I mean, for us, it was you're responding to your buddies. So your adrenaline kicked in and you're hauling ass. And I understand, like, yeah, you do need to set a pace so that you are an effective force once you arrive on, scene.
Yeah.
But when your buddy's hurt, and when your buddy's blown up, and when like the rest of the guys out there are struggling
Right.
and outnumbered and outgunned, you're busting ass. And we carried a lot of ammo. Initially, we just carried your standard combat load, but once we started getting hit a lot, and like have 5 PKM machine guns, pop over a wall less than 50 feet away at you and stuff, we started carrying a lot more ammo.
Yeah.
But
that does come at a cost, though, right? Talk about that, because you could say, we're going to carry more ammo. That shit's heavy.
Yeah. It is. It's super heavy, and you got your body armor. You got you have to carry everything. So like any food you want, any water. It's like 120 degrees in the summertime. So I mean, if you got to carry enough water to do whatever patrol you're doing or whatever, and make it back. And then if you get stuck after an ambush, like you better have a little bit extra. So I mean, but like we're climbing. So to describe kind of like the grape fields. So the grape fields, like imagine like every 5 feet there's a 3-foot mud wall, and the grapes grow up mud wall. So they make for great cover and concealment in a firefight. But you're climbing over these mud walls, and it's a maze. It's a labyrinth of mud walls. So having to carry all that weight and climb up and over mud walls and stuff just to avoid IEDs, because you don't dare take the paths, because that's where they're putting the bombs. And honestly, they're putting the bombs everywhere, in the fields, in the paths, on the streets, on the roads, in the walls. We found them everywhere. But like you did everything you could to avoid, taking the obvious choke point, the doorway. You don't take a doorway into the field. You climb over the wall. And like having to do that for kilometers upon kilometers, while carrying all this weight, it sucked. And it's not like you're glamorous, like, Navy SEALs hop out of the helicopter, go get your guy and then get back out. No, it's like, okay, well, the village is, 2 kilometers away. So let's carry everything we need to get there. And like if we get, hit on the way, you better have enough ammo.
And if you find an IED, is that the trigger, or is that its own device? Is it just a one-time thing? And the patrol stops either way. It has to, for some amount of time, has to reckon with that thing, whether they go around it and just keep pushing through, or, because it's a message from the enemy. You have to sort out what it means.
Exactly. And I don't know what kinds of IEDs you guys experience, but we experienced like all kinds, and even combinations and stuff. So you have like your pressure plate IED. That's, you step on it, it goes boom. You have your anti-pressure plate IED. That's, if you take weight off of it, it goes boom. You have your tripwires. You have your RC devices. Those are like, your cell phone IEDs, remote control IEDs. I mean, we found a kind of self-made claymore mine that they built out of a coffee can and nuts and bolts and stuff. Like, I mean, these guys were crafty, and they were good. They'd watch us and learn what we would do, and then they'd adapt. And we'd get hit by them, and we'd learn what they were doing, and then we'd adapt. And it's just a constant game of cat and mouse. And I mean, at some points it was hard to tell who was the cat and who was the mouse.
Boy, oh boy, you're saying it right there. I mean, all of this stuff, again, this is all just so familiar. We did not get blown up too often, but we got blown up, and we got fratricided often enough that you were just always on alert. Always. And look, all of our jobs are dangerous. So you're already doing something dangerous. It's high stakes. You can't make mistakes. You have to be ready. You know, like for me, if I'm going to go on a patrol with you guys, I have to know what the fuck I'm doing. More importantly, you guys have to believe that I know what the fuck I'm doing. And because I don't belong to a unit, right? I'm accentuating when you guys go out. I'm bringing intel collection, and I'm not looking for threat. I'm looking for everything. And so one of the things I would do when I showed up where I was in the place I'm talking about, it was so remote. We had airdropped because you couldn't reliably drive a vehicle out to us. Yes, there was a road, but it was look, it was dangerous. It was a rough road that would break vehicles, and things would break all the time. Like they'd arrive and be like, "Oh, thank God we got here." You know, our vehicle's on its last because all these vehicles were just tired and worn out at this point. And
Yeah.
so we were getting airdropped. I mean, that's how remote we were. And then Arghandab was over a mountain, even more remote. You know, and so there's no power anywhere. I mean, on our camp there was power, but out in the villages, no power, no plumbing. You know, it's very Stone Age out there. And yet the Taliban, a very small force, could pin us down indefinitely because, you know, and look, we weren't helpless, right? But how much fight do you want to bite off too? Because there's not a whole lot of help to come. And if you bring help from the camp to where you're at, what's at the post? You
Yeah,
know, not a whole lot of people left.
that's one of the things that we started to have to deal with is so our platoon operated out of COP Tynes, and you know, I was talking about QRF and stuff. So we were in charge of our own patrolling, we were in charge of our own QRF, and then we were also in charge of our own force protection.
Yeah.
So you know, you send a squad of guys out on patrol and they get hit, and you send a squad of guys out to react. You know, you're only left with so many guys at the outpost to defend the outpost. So, I mean, we were lucky
Yeah.
enough that there was never a coordinated attack where once our QRF left, you know, they hit our outpost.
Yeah.
The first and third platoon guys, their outpost got hit quite often. They were deeper in the orchards than we were. Yeah, like that I mean, we started taking casualties, and I think we took about 50% casualties. Our platoon alone took 6 KIA and 14 wounded. So
Yeah.
there was a point in time where we were down to maybe 2.5 squads worth of guys. And so you were either going out to get shot, you were responding to the guys getting shot, or you were the one of like 4 guys that were back at the outpost, you know, in the towers. We were running
Yeah.
skeleton crews on every aspect of, you know, every mission.
Why wasn't your battalion plussing you out, making you like a platoon plus with more people then?
Just we didn't have the guys readily available. The way that our battalion was kind of broken up is, you know, each company had its own AO. And you know, it was popping in the Arghandab. So I mean, we
Yeah.
supported each other as best we could. But you know, Alpha Company had their AO and they had their shit go popping. Bravo Company had their AO and their shit popping and stuff. Charlie
Yeah.
Company, like I said, second platoon operated out of COP Tynes, and then first and third operated out of COP Nolan. But you know, COP Nolan was getting hit all the time too. So
Yeah.
it was just, you know, it was just a shit show in that valley. So
Yeah.
and then as for like reinforcements, I mean, it takes time to get guys out there, right? Like you were saying, it
Does.
takes time to get supplies out there. So when you're fighting day in and day out, you know, and losing guys, it's couldn't keep up with reinforcements. We eventually did receive, you know, reinforcements and stuff. We got new Joes, and we lost some leadership, so we got leadership and things like that. But
Right.
yeah, I mean, there was a point in time where we were running we were running 2.5 squads of guys,
Sure.
and we just didn't have the manpower. The real, like, what you really needed to do to win in that valley was, you know, take ground and keep it. We
Mm.
didn't have the manpower to do that. You know, fight by saturating the valley with soldiers,
Yeah.
and you know, running the amount of guys we had. Like we couldn't. I mean, we could take ground, but we couldn't keep it.
Sure.
So, um,
Yeah.
yeah, saturation was definitely the way to win in the Arghandab, and I think the unit that replaced us. That's kind of the fight that they had, and they're starting on the beginning process of writing their book as well. So you're going to get
Yeah.
a Arghandab River Valley stories. Like I said, there's the Bravo Company book by Ben Kessling. William Yeski, he's a Bravo Company guy. He wrote his book called Damn the Valley. You'll have my book. You'll have the 101st book that's coming out that they replaced us. Alpha Company guys are starting to, get on board writing their book. There's going to be, these stories are going to be heard. So you're gonna, and I mean, yeah, they're important to us. Like we were talking earlier, like it might be like the audience, it's just same old, but
Right.
I mean, it's important to us, the guys who lived it and the guys who sacrificed to tell our stories, and especially to tell the stories of the guys who didn't come home.
When you say words like COP Tynes and COP Nolan, I know those are dead dudes. And that sticks in your head too. Like everybody wants to be valorous and everything, but there's a lot of danger everywhere, and you don't want to be the guy they name a cop after. It's just there's just a lot of weight with all of this stuff. And you were talking about earlier the patrol and having to get over these walls. Every time we cross a wall, the unit slows down. Every time you cross a wall, you're knocking some farmer's wall down. That means a negotiation. That means more work on the back end. Every time you cross on a wall, someone's pulling a muscle. Every time this is the thing, everybody, either the river or the irrigation ditches, we've got to cross these things. And so every time we do one of these things, someone is getting hurt, even if it's not a hurt for right now. Like one time I didn't quite make it across, and the guy grabbed me, and I hurt my shoulder, hurt his shoulder. All these things add up. And I'll say this too, because these are the details that you don't understand about combat. So all of that, from having to hop over all of these walls, right? If you take on a new workout, and like back then, like, there's all kinds of workouts. It was the beginning of CrossFit, and you still had like all the John Bastow beach body workouts. If you took on something else and you got so stiff because of a new workout, you can't do that. You've got to be pliable and movable. And this seems like the dumbest thing ever. But if you're going to go out on patrol and you just did a monster leg workout and you are hurting your unit, you can't. And so all of these things, none of you guys can realize, they limit how we do things. And so your shoulder is hurting, but you go out. Your back is hurting because you've been carrying shit and you put on extra weight. And believe me, like if I go out and we're carrying extra ammo, I'm going to take on a bunch of extra ammo. Like we'll worry about the pain stuff in our 50s. Hey, this is guys in his 50s. But we take the extra belt. I take the extra water because my job is not the fight part, right? I'm talking to people. And it's all of these things go into what you're talking about, that day-to-day thing. And you have an active enemy trying to find you and pin you down. By the way, they're trying to close with and destroy the enemy, just like we are.
Yeah, I mean, I never really thought of that because, when we were out there, we were 18 to 22-year-old kids. So, you fall off a wall, you get back up, you roll your ankle. Yeah, whatever, you limp the rest of the patrol. But I mean, cause we experienced like we were dealing with like amputations, so a lot of our buddies were like losing legs and stuff from the IEDs and whatnot.
Yeah.
So like if you rolled your ankle, it's like, all right, like don't be a pussy,
Right.
But I mean, that does take a toll on your body. And now that I'm like in my 30s, it's like, oh man, some of that stuff, you're feeling it now. But in the moments, like we didn't really focus too much on that. You had your objective, and like you said, you couldn't be broken. You had to be there for your buddies, and you had to make yourself useful. And just like I mean, that's kind of like a military thing. Is you don't want to be a broke dick, is what we called them.
Right.
So like you didn't go to sit call, when you're back in the rear, you always showed up to PT formation. I know a guy who ran 6 miles on a broken leg because he refused to go to sit call because he didn't want to be a broke dick. As soon as you're broken, you can't do your job. And then as soon as you can't do your job, like you feel less valued. And I feel like, man, we're not very good at maintaining ourselves. We just push through it, especially as like infantrymen. We're just like, whatever, like embrace the suck. But yeah, there's something to be said about, maintenance, especially with your body.
Yeah. Well, and I'm looking at this, when I'm patrolling in this time frame, I'm in my 40s, right? So this is something that I can see through a commander's eyes. I'm not a commander, but I speak commander, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this unit is getting torn up. And so one of the things I'm going to say when I talk to the boss, be like, hey, those guys are getting torn up, and and that's part of what I do. That's part of the intel that I collect is like to let the sergeant major know, like, hey, these guys, they're getting this or that or whatever, because it's crazy. Depending on how far removed battalion or the brigade is from you guys, they're going to leave you alone to do your stuff. As often when I showed up, as often as I could, I would bring 2 5-gallon drums of ice cream because I knew you guys were getting that stuff, and I needed friends on that cop, right? And I would make sure the boss there and the senior NCO, like, hey, I brought you guys 10 gallons of ice cream, and he'd be like, oh, thank God, we haven't had ice cream in days. Meanwhile, the person who provides ice cream, he's like, oh, they're good, they got all kinds of stuff. I'm like, no, they haven't had ice cream in ages. And so that was how I endeared myself to you guys. But I'm using my sergeant major eyes and my commander eyes, and I'm looking at all of the things that we have to do because those guys don't know. They don't know that ground truth. And that seems like a small thing, but that is how you get a fresh guy to come in. The fresh guy's got to be trained up and everything. But there's so many aspects of these fights that are so complex that, yeah, you're 18, you're not supposed to know. There's supposed to be someone who looks out for you guys above that. And if everybody there is 24 years and younger, including the commander, you don't have that long-term vision of, look, we're all going to get hurt down the road. I'm not talking about that, but like the day-to-day mission capacity, like that guy's got a broken fucking leg. Get him out of here, that kind of thing. Because he won't leave until you order him to leave and have a helicopter spinning out there. And even then he's going to bitch about it. But you got a broken leg, dude. Go back. We'll let you come back. Don't worry. But there's people that are that stubborn, that rough, because we're all so desperate. This goes back to the very thing when I'm reading the book and I want to get into your fight with you guys to help, right? We're all desperate to be there and do that thing, but it's like a giant sand hourglass, just dropping your energy all the time, and it's so hard to replenish. And you're getting shot at, and guys are getting killed, and guys are getting blown up. It is a wicked, nasty fight. That's what I'm trying to get people to understand is all from the very basic things to the highest things. It's just fraught with consumption of us.
Yeah, and it's not just a physical drain as well. It's also a mental drain. So like our first 2 KIA that we took actually wasn't in the Arghandab. It was in Panjwai district. We are attached to the Canadian forces, and we were, I mean, we got in some fights and stuff. We'd always get fights in Chowgar and 310 Kill and stuff, but they were very one-sided. We'd always win. We'd always chase them off. The Kiowas would come in and, do their gun runs and whatnot. And we were always victorious. So that was like our version of war, right? Oh yeah, like we're going to go in and win. So when we lost our first 2 guys in Panjwai to an IED blast, that was meant for one of the Canadian tanks, and we hit it with our Humvee. That was really kind of an eye opener for a lot of us. It woke us up like, oh man, like we're not invincible. This is a 2-sided fight, and then we started. We lost another. We moved into the Arghandab, and we lost another guy, and that guy was like the person we lost. I don't want to like give it away or anything, but like if we could lose him, it's like holy cow, like we could lose anybody. And
Right.
then the next guy, we ended up losing was like the little brother of the platoon,
Mm.
one of the sweetest guys and stuff. So that's kind of when you lost your hope that you were going to make it out. And
Right.
so there's just this mental drain going on constantly, especially you're constantly getting shot at, and not only constantly getting shot at, you're just constantly slowly losing guys. So I mean, once you like, you always had it in the back of your head that, okay, I might make it out, but after that third, well, technically the 4th KIA, you started to really realize your mortality, and you're like, I'm probably not going to make it out of here.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we started to, like, we all had the same mentality though, and I think that's why we did so well, and we made it out with as many guys as we did, is because we were all there for each other. And it's like, you know what, like I might not make it out of here, but I'm going to make sure you do. And guys would volunteer to go out on patrols if their buddies would go. One of our FOs had this saying. He was going out every day. He
Yeah.
had this. His motto was "You go, I go," and that just shows the character of these men in to Charlie, and the
Yeah.
friendship and the bond. And it's like we were either gonna live together or die together. And
Yeah.
but just that kind of that downward spiral mentally. We were talking about the physical downward spiral, but there's also
Yeah.
a
Yeah. Yeah.
mental one. And there was a point where we lost our hope,
Yeah.
and but well, I guess I mean, you can't say we completely did, because we never gave up. We never gave up. We continued to go out every day. We met the enemy at the second canal, because that's where we knew they were, and we continued to fight. And we made the guys that didn't make it out. We made it out. And we ran away from that valley once we got back to Fort Bragg. I don't think any of us wanted to have anything to do with that deployment, and
Yeah.
we didn't want to dwell on it. I mean, I'm speaking for myself at this point, but I was surprised. I didn't believe it. I didn't think I made it out. I thought, I was like, man, this is a dream, and I'm gonna wake up and, and be dead. But after the shock of surviving the valley wore off, guys started to struggle, and we've been struggling on our own for the last 12 years. And
Yeah.
I think with the whole books coming out and guys getting back together, we're doing reunions now. We're doing Zoom calls
Good.
now. Dale Nullinger is he's been spearheading getting the two Charlie guys back together. And
Yeah.
I think we're starting to face our demons just the way we did back when we first faced them together. So.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're probably still losing guys. I mean, that's just the reality of this modern fight.
Yeah, we had a suicide in our platoon, and then we had another attempted suicide as well. So,
Yeah.
one of the things, the mottos of my book is, in the end, the valley always wins, and it's still got its claws in us today. With the suicides, and guys are starting to get sick from burn pit and toxic exposures. Guys have cancer. So we're in the end, one way or another, the valley's going to get you, be it, cancer,
Yeah.
or,
The end.
you take, So, but we're doing what we can to stop that. We don't want the valley to win anymore. And I say the valley because for us, it's actually the valley, but it's kind of like a poetic, like, metaphor. It could be it could be your mountaintop. It could be your, wherever you fought, that's what's haunting you. You can't let it win. So, two Charlie guys, we're trying to not let the valleys get any more W's on us. But I kind of want my book to maybe open up the eyes to other guys and be like, hey, like, reach out to your guys. Don't let your valley haunt you anymore. Come back together, tell your story, stuff like that.
You began this whole thing with talking about getting permission from the other guys, because this is a deeply personal and a thing that we battle with, right? And so just to blithely write something to not include their mess, because this, if you get into a firefight, there's 27 dudes, there's 42 different versions of that firefight that you saw. And I'm not even talking about the enemy side. Like, you're like, oh, maybe it was this, maybe it was that. You're not even sure. So it's crazy. So take all of those, put them into a book without including those guys. Yeah, that's going to cause some resentment. And even if you do it, there's going to be the guys that are jealous because they want to, but don't do it. There's all that stuff in addition to that. And again, I want to go back to this whole thing's idea of the sand draining out. Some of that sand we don't get back. Some of it replenishes, right? But that burn pit cost, that torn ligament cost, that missing leg, like the amputees, they suicide themselves at a rate that's greater than our regular horrific rate. And the cost for them to go to the VA and to have to fight. I mean, I have to fight all the time for service, right? And if I don't do it, who's going to fight that fight? And so the thing that triggers me the most in my dangerous zone, because I've got suicidal ideation every day. I'm fine, but it happens. I have to go fight the VA. That's what makes me, that's the hardest thing for me, is to go do that. So all of that stuff is the cost of that value it extracts every day. So I wanted to ask about the permission thing is so cool that you approach it that way, but you're also in the 82nd. And when I worked in the 82nd, there is a demand from those ghosts behind us, those dudes who laid on the ground in World War II. And they're like, I don't need a jacket because there's no jackets around. My buddy doesn't have a jacket. I'm not going to have a jacket. We're going to fight in the freezing cold. And if when you let up off the accelerator, those dudes are back there being like, hey, get your foot on the accelerator, because there really is only one pace. It really is. I'll use football. I often use us as an example. Let's use them. If you don't come as hard as you can, you're a danger to everybody, yourself, your team, even the person you're playing against. You have to go hard all the time. And it does have these costs that we're talking about.
Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, I wanted to ask permission from the guys because I wanted, it's not just my story to tell. To tell this story right, I had to tell our story.
Yeah.
And, I could, the way I wrote the book, it's third person omniscient. So I can get in the heads of all the guys. And
Right.
there is no I in this book. I'm a character in my own book. So it's, I didn't want to tell my story. I wanted to tell our story. And in order to do that, I needed to get the guys on board. And
Yeah.
I was lucky that they were. And I was lucky that they were willing to participate and record, the interviews with them and to tell our story. And it was interesting what you said about, like, you there's one firefight, there could be 40 different,
Yeah.
storytellings of that. I was pretty fortunate that we all remembered very well what happened to us in the valley, and there wasn't a lot of contradiction. There's probably little minor things here or there,
Yeah.
but like, I didn't have to really be like, oh man, like, who's, this guy says this and then this guy says this, what do I go with? It was more so we were telling the same story from a different perspective.
Okay. Good.
So I was fortunate in that, but I can definitely see how that could have been a, throw a stick in my spokes, on my bike or whatever,
Yeah.
whatever that saying is. um, I, but yeah, we all remembered pretty well, and there was some things that when the guys when the guys read the book, they got back to me and they're like, "Holy crap, man! I didn't know you guys did this for us," or they didn't
Right.
know this happened, and it was very eye opening to them, and like, wow. So to hear that from the guys and like to thank me, and be like, "Oh, thank you for telling that," or I
Yeah.
had no idea. That was super powerful to hear that from, like, especially your Joes. When
Yeah.
they come up to you and be like, "Man, we didn't know you did that much for us." So to hear that, man, it was worth it. And I wanted to use the book as an excuse to kind of see all the guys again.
Yeah.
It was awesome to show up at their front door and meet their wives, meet their kids, meet their families, see what they're doing for work, just see the men that they have become, because I hadn't
Mm.
seen them in 12 years. Some of them, the
Yeah.
last time I saw them, I was loading them onto a medevac helicopter.
Ugh.
And uh, it was super powerful. And it was very motivating, to see these great men. I had known them from battle, and now to see them and what they've become, and they're still these great men.
Yeah.
Um, that was super, just a highlight in my life.
Yeah. We're talking with Andrew Bragg. He wrote a fantastic book called The Devil's Playground. It's when is it? It drops later this month, right? Or
Yeah,
is it out
October
now?
15th is the
October
official
15th.
release date.
You guys know what I always say, buddy read, buy two, get one for you and a friend. And if you want to get an understanding of the nitty gritty, what I've read through the book, and I've not finished it yet, but what I've read through the book for me was so powerful that it's been hard for me to read it, and hard, not because of the quality of the writing, but because of the emotions that come through. We were talking about this earlier, the stream of images and experiences. And I don't know about you, but I can have these ghost smells where I'll be like, what the heck? And that smell is not present in reality. My brain smells it. And so all of that stuff makes it very real for me. So when I'm telling all of you guys, that's the level of this book where it gives me enough there's enough cost in this book for me, and I love it, but it's so real. It makes it hard to read. So get this book, because you're going to be as close to in the fight as you can when you read it, and you understand what these brave men and all of these service members do. Did you guys have any women out there at all?
No, not. It was 2009, 2010, so they still weren't letting females in the infantry. And our battalion might have had a couple of women in like the FSC clip, so like the supply and stuff
Yeah,
like that. But as for like two Charlie, no, we were all little dudes running around
yeah.
Lord of the Flies.
When I was out in the in Mazan, there was a female pilot who would be on the rotation, and anytime she called in on the radio, there'd be dudes hounding the radio room because they just wanted to hear a female voice. So that's
Yeah.
another thing that people don't understand is, and again, I don't know how it was for you guys specifically, but we were rationed on water, so there were only so many showers you could take. There was only so much laundry you could do because we just didn't have the resources for that. And one of the things you realize is if you just don't take a shower, keep yourself clean, but just don't take a shower, you don't realize how bad everybody smells. The second you clean yourself, you're like, oh my God, we all smell like shit. And so you got to get past that point where you smell bad again and your sense of smell. It's the craziest thing. These are all the things that people don't understand about these fights. And oh, by the way, there's a lethal enemy waiting to catch you in something all the time. So even as you're dealing with all these other formalities of combat living, none of it being easy, there's always that enemy trying to get its piece and fight you guys. I wanted to ask about this. We talked about the cost when you lose these guys, and most people haven't ever seen this, but when you do lose somebody, you have a formation and you do some kind of acknowledgement. And what I would often do is whenever the battalion I was in, brigade, if the commander was going to rotate out, which they always do, to wherever that place is where they're going to have that ceremony, I would do my best to be there with them. Because one of the things I realized is it's just lonely to be the commander. And it seems like they're this resolute person who's, can handle everything. But the reality is they need a battle buddy. And it's not always the sergeant major. Sometimes those guys don't get along all that great. And so I would rotate out and you see these ceremonies. And not only is it some 18-year-old kid who's lost his life for whatever reason, there's his actual boots, if possible. And they do that roll call. And that is a hit. It's a hit, even if you are in that unit. And I can't even imagine when you guys are losing people and it's like, and another one, and another one, and another. It's just impossible. So I want you to talk about that. But also, did you guys have a problem with everybody? They call this green on blue or blue on green, depending on what you want to say it. When the Afghans turn on us internally. So our Afghan partners are known to shoot Americans. We had a couple instances of this out in the area that I was in. So talk about that internal fratricide that would happen as well.
So we were lucky that we didn't have any actual fratricide committed. We worked very closely with the Afghan National Police. They shared our outpost with us. So our outpost was split in half. We had the Afghan National Police Force and their like huts and whatnot. And then we had our two Charlie element. So we were living together. We were living amongst each other. But they never turned their rifles against us, but they were also kind of very corrupt. There were
Yeah.
times where we caught the police chief Bismullah with a radio, and it wasn't a police radio, so it was like, whoa, who are you talking to?
Yeah.
And there were times where they would come to us and ask us for more ammo, like a resupply of ammo. Because they would get their ammo from us. We were supplying them, and we'd be like, well, you haven't shot anything in the last couple weeks. Like, why do you need ammo? So where's this ammo going? And don't get me wrong, like they never questioned, their loyalty to us because they were very loyal to us, but they were also in a very tight spot as well. And,
Yeah.
the fighters in the area could have been their brothers, or they could have been threatening them and whatnot. So but yeah, there was definitely a time where they knew things that we didn't, and they didn't tell us, and
Yeah.
we we got hit. And there's a incident, so I guess a story that didn't make the book. was they had carrier pigeons as pets. And as we would
Those
leave our
motherfuckers.
outpost, they would flip the carrier pigeons, just like the movie Training Day, just to
Yeah.
kind of mark our location or to tell the fighters in the area once they saw the birds flying. It's like, oh, look, like they're leaving now. And as soon as we left the outpost, there was eyes on us at all times. You'd have the kids, flying kites to mark what village we were in. You had, just you had the radio chatter amongst the fighters saying, "Oh, look, they're leaving. They're heading east, or they're heading south, or whatever direction." And you'd try your best to lose them in the orchards and in the grapes and stuff. And sometimes we could, because it was heavily vegetated. But sometimes, most of the time, they knew where we were. It wasn't the fastest traveling because we had all our
Yeah.
gear and we're climbing over walls. So um
Yeah.
but luckily enough, none of them turned their rifles towards us and actually shot at us.
Yeah.
There was one of the AMP officers, because I was always point man, so I was always up there with them in the interpreter. And there's the AMP officer that carried the RPG. So he had like a backpack full of RPGs and then the RPG rocket launcher. And this guy was always high. He was always high on, I don't know what he
Yes.
was smoking, but it's like, I don't know if I want you in front of me so I can catch your back
Yeah.
blast, or behind me so I can catch a rocket to the back of the head. So I just had
Yeah.
him stand beside me on patrols.
Yeah.
But like these guys, like they're in a rough spot, right? They don't really. The
They are.
AMP didn't have the funding that the Afghan National Army had. It was kind of like the trickle down effect. So they get the hand me
Yeah.
downs of the army. They don't have the best gear, and a lot of them, man, I don't. I don't know how old they were, but a lot of them were young, and I mean we were
Yeah.
young as well. But some of these, it's like, man, you might as well give a 14-year-old in America, that AK-47, and he could probably do a
Yeah.
better job.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but they just, yeah, it's just that, and their motivation and dedication. It just wasn't. It's like they didn't want to be there. So when we would drag them out on
Yeah.
patrols with us, it was like, man, I don't want to. So they just kind of drag their feet and um, they'd tag along. But it seemed like the Afghan National Police that we were working with just weren't motivated. Now that's not to say
Yeah.
they weren't all like that, because when we were in Panjwai with the Canadian forces, we were working with the Afghan National Police as well. And I can't remember the police chief's name, but that guy was awesome. That guy
Yeah.
was like, he met with us every day to go over things. He squared away his guys. That guy actually cared, and his police officers actually cared. So it was like a night
Yeah.
and day difference. And it's kind of just like you rolling the dice on what you get with those guys. But
Yeah.
initially at COP Tynes, that police force with Bismillah, like we started with them with those guys didn't even wear their uniforms. They just be
Yep.
walking around with AK-47s in a man dress, and we almost shot them sometimes because we didn't know who the heck they were. So
Right.
we started establishing ground rules. So it's like, okay, like you're wearing your uniform, and
Yeah.
this is how you carry. This is what you do. And we did work with them, and they did improve over time, but there was never a point in time where we could really fully trust them because of some of the things that they were doing. And it's like, man. So
It's a challenging thing. So one of the things I would have done if I was there with you guys was to get to know those dudes and sort out where they're at. Because if I can get that to the commander, then we can lead those guys and provision them properly. In where I was at, our chief of police actually got blown up by an IED. And these things, you said it before, nuts, bolts. There was a push rod and piston piece inside of this IED that they scooped it all up, and we did analysis for it and everything. But to understand those guys, their condition, and work from there to go, how do we do this? And then the trickiest part is to pass that lesson on to the next unit, because we refuse to accept that the unit before us is better than us. But when you hand off, they're absolutely better than you. They know more about this fight, and it's so hard for us to accept that lesson. And we had total amnesia. 3 units back, forget it. You don't even know who it was. You have no idea what they did and what they failed at. And so we would have things like the Center for Lessons Learned. Bullshit. We didn't learn shit. Because here's the thing. One of the differences I had that you guys didn't have was you guys were rotated with the top of me. And I'd be like, oh, these guys don't know shit. And then we go 6 weeks and you start going out and doing things. And I'm like, man. So one of the things I would do is I would take, and look, this is not because I'm omnipotent. It's because I made all the mistakes. I just happened to stay and learn and make less mistakes. And so the unit, the battalion, the brigade, whoever it was, would say, "Hey, we're gonna do, thing number one, because that's in the playbook." And I'm like, "Oh my god!" So I'd go see the major or the captain in charge of this thing, and I would bring the slide decks to them. I print them out and hand them like, "Let's do thing number one," but realize the last 4 units have done thing number one. What are we doing?
Yeah.
Because thing number one didn't stay fixed, right? And so we have all of these problems. And with the AMP, all of the Afghan, whatever, police, border patrol, whoever it was that you were working with, they're all different. We weren't reliably able to get them over the line. When the sergeant major would show up, we would all do sand table drills and we would talk about the operation, but we didn't do that stuff on a day-to-day basis, and neither did they. And where they got good, we weren't able to translate that back to where things were. If they were reluctant to fight, we couldn't figure out why. And so that's really, I look at that as that's all on not you and us, but us as the Americans. We weren't able to go, how do we fix this? So I'll give you an example, and then I'm going to shut up and let you talk. We got into a firefight, and I was curious how the AMP would provision their rounds, because we weren't directly giving them rounds. And so the chief of police is like, "Well, I'm going to fill out this form and I'm going to send it up, and then eventually the rounds will come down." Right. And this sounded like an impossible process. And so sure enough, he did it. And I follow this request dunk, 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 as it went up the chain. And then it got killed somewhere. And I'm like, "Well, who killed it?" None of the Afghans killed it. It turned out there was this E7. And he's like, "Oh, those guys are tied to the Taliban, and so they don't need any ammo." Like, you don't even know anything. And so the government failed because we failed and pulled that request out. These guys still needed ammo. Of course, they're tied to the Taliban. Mullah Omar lived like right there in that area, not in Mazan, but 20 miles away in Zabul, where we were at. He lived there. And so, yeah, all these guys are part of the Taliban. You don't get to escape that there. It's like saying, I'm in Ohio. All these people are Reds fans, like, yeah, of course they're Reds fans. It's their team. That's where they're from. But we couldn't wrap our heads around that. So we struggled a lot with these basic principles. And that's what I try to do my best to do is, yeah, of course, I'm looking for like, where's the next bomb going to come from? But you got to be friends with these guys, and they don't have enough food. The commander's like, "I don't have any money. These guys aren't paying me." Like, "Yeah, we'll pay you in a couple of months." Who wants to live like that? I'm supposed to go on leave. These guys will always say, "I'm supposed to go on leave. I've never been on leave." Like, well, what happens? And the commander's like, "If you let those guys leave, they'll never come back." Probably true. And so you had all of these problems that go into this mix of like, how do we make the AMP more proficient? Oh, and by the way, is anybody in town ever going to call the police? Fuck no. Because the police weren't seen as viable to them. So all these problems go into the very thing. You're like, why the fuck are we even there if we're going to do such a bad job at helping improve this condition? And that's not your job, right? But it is our job as the Americans. Like, how come we're failing so bad at this thing in 2010, in 2011, in 2015? We're still failing at this very same thing because we hate the bad news of this shit is hard. It's unpredictable. And dudes get killed, and the next guy comes, you got to get him trained up. So it's just me ranting on my soapbox a little bit, but that stuff you're talking about, it's vital to the success of the unit. And we had no ability, in spite of being the 82nd, no ability to reliably stand somebody up and say, this person is now better. And if we did say that, it was probably a lie.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, I went a little crazy. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. So I wanted to kind of like address what you said about like,
yeah,
that working with the AMP and stuff like that. If you really look at that, like we're the 82nd Airborne, we're a hammer. We go in and fuck shit up. We're not really trained in the special operations task of training up another force, but that's really what Afghanistan was all about, right? Is trying to create this government and a system of government that could fend for its own country. That's what special operations do. They develop their own militias and they train their own fighting force to do that. So that's not quite what the 82nd Airborne's meant for. We're meant for we'll jump in and we'll fuck shit up. So we're tasked with a mission that we're not. I would say that we can still do it because we still train our own troops and we're successful at that. So it's just one more step to train, a foreign troop. So it's not out of our bounds of, what we are capable of, but it's
Yeah.
not exactly what we train for.
Sure.
So
Right.
you have that aspect, but what you were talking about is like, it's hard. It's very hard, and that's one thing that the American people don't understand. When you're trying to build a government back up, it takes time.
Yeah.
And I mean, look at Japan and look at Germany. That's World War II, World War One, World War II, right? Like, we
Hmm.
are still in Germany, we are still in Japan, helping with that.
Yeah.
So 20 years, we were in Afghanistan for 20 years, and then we left. If we really wanted to do it right, we'd be there forever. And I don't think the
Yeah.
American people wanted that, and that's why it ended up the way it did. And I don't really, I mean, we can talk about that if you want, but yeah, I wanted to like say, like, yeah, it's like we're the 82nd Airborne. We're door
Yeah.
kickers. We're the hammer. We're not really trained to uh, hold the hands of a foreign military or foreign police force and tell them
Yeah.
what they should be doing. uh,
Yeah.
so yeah, it was weird, but I mean, that's not to say we weren't capable of it, and it's not to say we didn't do a good job. Um, but yeah, it also, like, I think that the enemy knew that they could just outweight us, that we weren't going to be there forever. And I
Right.
think that the police force knew that, and the Afghan army knew that. And it's like, there's always this, like, time in the future where we were going to be gone. And I
Yeah.
think they kind of
Yeah.
dreaded that. So I think that's why you saw some of the corruption that you did amongst those forces, is because they had to look out for themselves as well.
They sure did.
We
Yeah.
weren't gonna be there to, shoot beside them all
Yeah.
forever. And the enemy, they just had to wait us out, and eventually we'd be
Yeah.
gone, and then those guys would be fucked. And I think they
Yeah.
knew that, so they kind of played both sides a little bit. So
No, for
it's
sure. They make their deals ahead of time, and they are
yeah,
better at this than we are. They're better in stability than we are. And even you talked about the special forces side, the village stability operation platform. That thing struggled to be real. They won't tell you that because they don't believe it. But if you go out and test it, you're like, oh, this isn't working either, right? So we struggled with these basic things, these basic muscle movements that we had to do to make all of these things work. And you're right, 82nd, like their job is to parachute in from the sky and like, holy shit, the 82nd's here.
yeah,
That's what you guys do well, right? But what did they have you guys doing? And they got tankers out there doing this job. You know,
yeah,
tankers aren't supposed to be presence patrol people, but and I love it. This is me fucking with the tankers, but when they're death before dismount, and then they get to the field, to the actual war, and the sergeant major's like, dismount. He didn't actually say that, but that's what happens. And so they're like, no, you can't be in your tanks. And so they're out. Like, that's how far. This accentuates your point here. That's how far afield we are from what a field artillery unit is good at. And so they go out and they struggle to get this stuff right. And so when I'm doing my work, trying to help us be better, because look, I look at it from my point of view. What I'm trying to do is help the commander win more, lose less, help the enemy lose more, win less. And if we suck, we've got to fix us fast. And it's unfair to all of us to give us 5,000 different jobs that are all complex and all require our attention. And so, because you actually have this fight that you're actually doing, that you're supposed to do, and that's what you guys do well. Meanwhile, no one's doing a quality job on all of the other things that you have to do to finish the job, right? And so we never stop with these stupid little fights that are distracting from the bigger goal of stabilizing this nation. And we didn't do that. This is not on you, it's not on me, but it's on the generals, and they're all for their careers. All those guys couldn't figure. And so I am hard on them, but I love us, the guys that go out and do our best with what we have, and try to figure out how to survive the day, survive our lives, but also, be great. We all want to be great.
I mean, to be fair, and I'm not coming to the general's defense, but
Yeah.
to their defense, I don't think any nation has ever been able to successfully stabilize that area. You look at the Russians, you look at the British, you look at
Yeah.
like I think Alexander the Great fought in Afghanistan, and
Yeah.
throughout
Yeah.
history, that area has not been able to be stabilized. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's a tough mission to begin with, but
I'm gonna point the
um,
scoreboard and go, "Oh, for their careers,"
it,
right? It's a
yeah,
fair critique of them.
but
But
there's
yeah.
like to go over like lessons learned as well. You look at the unit that you're replacing, and you look at all their AARs, like after action reviews and whatnot. Like basically, like your sand tables, what you're talking about. Like, oh, what
Yeah.
happened here? You look at all those reports. You can read all those reports and everything. Um, but I mean, at the end of the day, you gotta experience it yourself.
Yeah.
You can
Yeah.
take those lessons learned and learn from them, but like you're still gonna make some mistakes, and you're still gonna
Yeah.
repeat some
Yeah.
mistakes. Um, but that's one thing. So the army during their RIP, when you're replacing a unit,
Yeah.
you do what's called a left seat, right seat, and that's the opportunity for the unit that's replacing the other unit in the area to learn everything they can from their leadership and their Joes, and that's also the opportunity for that unit to show the incoming unit, hey, this is what's up, this is what you're going to experience. Um,
Right.
and our left seat, right seat was very quick with the guys that we replaced. They were they were done, and rightfully so. They had taken a lot of
Yeah.
casualties as well in that valley and fought a hard fight.
Yeah.
But so went out on a couple patrols, but it was very quick. So we had to learn a lot
Yeah.
of lessons on our own. Um,
Yep.
and thank God we actually went into the valley when we did. We went in December, so I don't know. So Afghans are usually seasonal fighters. They don't like to fight in
Yeah.
the cold. They don't like to, So it's usually the summertime is when they fight. So we
Yeah.
had the blessing of going into the valley when all the leaves were gone. You could see hundreds of yards. It was kind of like a Tim Burton film with all the pomegranate orchards, like the
Yeah.
trees and stuff like that. But we had that blessing in disguise because the fighters weren't there. We had a full reign of the valley. We could walk around. We could learn like terrain. We could learn people, who's supposed to be there, who's not supposed to be there.
Yep.
Uh,
Yep.
and then once the leaves returned to the valley, and so did the fighters, that's when it kicked off. So we did kind of have that advantage. And then the unit that replaced us, the 101st, they replaced us kind of during the height of the fighting, in like
Yeah.
early July.
It's so hard.
So and we did the best we could. Like as to Charlie, we
Sure.
really like, man, we we lost a guy, um, trying to show them the valley. But we also had to play that game of like, man, like we're almost done. How do we, can we justify losing any more guys right when we're
Right.
about to leave? We ended up losing a guy in doing so, but we
Yeah.
did our best for those guys that replaced us. Um,
Yeah.
and they had a hard fight ahead of them. But it's so hard to, especially like when you've been fighting every single day and like losing so many guys, and then you see these just new guys coming in, just completely like oblivious to what they're about to step into.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's not like they got to wade into it. They got thrown in the deep
Mm.
end. And the guys that
Yeah.
replaced us, they weren't even infantry. They were an artillery
Uh,
battalion. So they
yeah.
were an artillery battalion tasked with an infantry mission, and a hell of an infantry mission, so just to see these guys coming in, and it's kind of fucked up, but it's like, man, I don't even want to know your name because
Right.
I don't want to know another dead man. And they have a hell of a story to tell. They're working on telling it, but
Yeah.
just from our perspective of that, it's some of the questions they would ask. Like I specifically remember one of the guys um, asking me. He had the M203 grenade belt, on his rig, so he had all these grenades on his rig, and he's sitting there and he's asking me, he's like, "Hey, if I step on an IED, are these gonna blow up?" And
Yeah.
I was sitting there like, oh shit, that's a good question. I was like,
Yeah.
well, one of our 203 gunners, he got blown up, and those didn't go off. So,
Yeah.
but I don't think that they couldn't. So I was like, just be careful. But that's like
Yeah.
kind of like the stuff they were asking, and like
Sure.
once they started to realize that, oh, this isn't like training, this is actually the real deal, and you're going to lose guys.
Yeah.
That's the hardest thing to tell a unit replacing you is like, man, you are going to lose guys. There is
I
no, oh,
yes.
it's like
It,
guys are gonna die, and that's you couldn't, man, I couldn't look them in the eyes.
it's really hard. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Those ghosts stick with you too, and we had a similar thing where we had made a lot of progress because we'd worked on the other part of the problem as well. We had the luxury of not having constant firefights. So we were working on the governance side really hard. And we put so we were in a valley that went into a basin. Arghandab kind of goes through this basin too. And we were going to put a checkpoint out there because that's what the government wanted, their government, not our government. And we were going to be out there partnered, sort of like a mini JSS. But we were also closing down our footprint in that area. And so when we changed, it was the best handover I'd ever had. That battalion commander is like, we're listening to you. We got the ball on the 50-yard line. We know it. We don't want to drop it. And so we go back out to the area that we'd done a lot of work, made a lot of progress. A lot of things were messed up still, but we go and we see that local commander, lieutenant. He couldn't hear it. He was there to count stuff, spool up concertina, put it back on a truck, and get it out of there. And before I'd even left, they had lost the dude out of that checkpoint. They had a fratricide thing, and I think they lost all 3 dudes out there. And you couldn't tell that unit, even though they wanted to be told. You couldn't tell them, and they lost guys, and the unit before had lost guys to fratricide too. So it was a real threat out there. Plus, the Taliban threat. I was going to ask you, and I don't want to take too much more of your time, but when you guys were fighting the Taliban, did you ever have a sense? Because the classic thing that I'd always hear is like, we will push the Taliban south, we will encircle them and destroy the Taliban. Never happened because they didn't want that fight. They wanted the fight that they picked, and then they disappear into the ether. And so you couldn't reliably, in a lot of places, you can reliably kill the Taliban guy every day because that's not what they were there to do. So did you ever have a sense that you guys were going to win and destroy the Taliban? Were you guys being briefed that, like, this is how we're going to approach this, and at some point we'll encircle them and just, whatever, like grab their flag and like, whatever.
Well, so the fighters in the area, and it's hard to call them Taliban because I mean they probably were, but like what people don't understand is like fighters from all around the world went to Afghanistan to fight Americans. Like my first
Yeah,
deployment, I was in an ambush with over 150 guys, and they were speaking 6 different languages over the radios. They were speaking
yeah,
Turkish. They were speaking. So it's like whoever wanted to fight the coalition forces or America
yeah,
in particular went to Afghanistan to kill us. So, but I just prefer saying fighters, but I mean the Taliban, yeah,
yeah.
that's probably what I mean, the Arghandab
But
River
fair enough.
Valley,
Good point, right? Yeah,
yeah, the Arghandab River Valley was just northwest of Kandahar city, so I'm sure it was the Taliban, and that was our objective, was to prevent freedom of movement in and out of the city through the river. But these fighters, whoever you want to call them, Taliban now, but back in the day, the Mujahideen, these guys have been fighting in this valley for centuries. Like
yeah,
some of them fought the Russians off. They know what they're doing. They know what playbook to use. Like I said, they were using the same playbook as they were using with the Russians at the time. So they know how to do it. And yeah, we'd like to think that, oh yeah, like we had complete control of that valley.
yeah,
But in reality, they did. They prevented our ability to be able to maneuver on them with IEs.
yep,
They'd ambush us one day, and then they'd watch us and be like, "Oh, okay, that's what they do. They flank. Okay, let's put bombs on our flanks." And it's like, oh, okay, like, and then they'd try to bait us in. They'd take a couple of pop shots. They knew we'd chase them, and then
yeah,
they'd have another element take up a couple of pop shots from somewhere else, so we chase them. And it's like, oh, okay, I see what they're doing. They're trying to bait us into stuff. So I mean, not to say that like we got our asses kicked, because we kicked their asses too.
Sure. Yeah.
We
Of
got a
course.
lot of ICOM chatter over their radios about guys that we took out, and we even had a ISR feed of a funeral that they had. We had gotten one of their commanders. We had killed him, and they were actually having a funeral a couple villages down. Why we weren't able to intercept that and take out the rest of them while we were while they were leaving the funeral, I don't know. I guess out of respect for that, but they ambushed us on the way back from a funeral we had.
Mm.
So, but just they knew how to fight in that valley, and they knew well. And that's not to say that progress wasn't made, because the unit we replaced, they fought a hellacious fight, but I feel like we took it to them, and we didn't ever lose any ground. And we continued to
Right.
take it to them every day. And then the unit that replaced us, they had the numbers of guys to saturate the area, and they started to develop outposts, south of the second canals and stuff like that. So we were making progress throughout the entire time we were in that valley, but um, there was never like, okay, like, we're going, like, the enemy is here, we're going to send in squad from here and here and here. Like, it wasn't
Right.
like a playbook ever. It was usually just, we know they're down there, we'll have to go out there and bait them out into an ambush, um, so that they would ambush us. And then once we were able to find out their exact location, then we could be like, okay, how do we approach this? If we can use the Kiowa helicopters, we did. That was a lot of so they would bait us into IEDs, we would bait them into shooting at us, so that we could have the Kiowas come in with gun runs. We did so we'd have the Kiowas overhead, and when the Kiowas were overhead, the enemies didn't really engage
They
us
don't
that
like
much.
that.
Yeah, so what we would do is we have our FOs tell the Kiowas to go outside of earshot, so that they couldn't be heard, but they'd still be on standby. So they'd be flying somewhere, where the enemy couldn't hear them. So the enemy would think they went to refuel or something, and we were on our own. So then they'd ambush us, and then we'd call them right back, and they'd already have their heading and their point of attack, and they'd do gun runs on them and stuff like that. So we'd bait them kind of like that. We'd be like, "Oh no, we're on our own. Please don't shoot
Yeah.
us."
Oh
And
no. Yeah.
yeah, and then they'd be right back there. And but no, it was. I mean, that it was pretty. I don't want to say it was an even fight, but
Right.
I just don't want people to think that, oh, we were overwhelmingly beating them, because
Right.
they've been fighting in that valley for centuries.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but I mean, yeah, we did get a couple. We got like confirmations over the ICOM radio. It was always like our interpreter would listen to their chatter on the radio, and it's always
Sure.
motivating when they're doing their roll call, and it's like, Mohammed, are you there? And there's no answer.
Mhm.
Um,
Ain't no Muhammad there. Give it
yeah,
5 minutes. Another Muhammad will be there though.
yeah. But it's
Yeah.
also it's kind of demotivating when you hear a boom go off in the distance, and then you hear uh, all the ICOM chatter of like, Mohammed, was that your bomb? No. Ishmael, was that your bomb? No. And then he just goes down the line of all the guys asking if that was their bomb. And it's like, how many bombs are out there? It's like, holy shit.
Yeah.
Like, man, we are surrounded by bombs right now.
Yeah.
Um,
All of it. The icon. I was going to ask about the icon stuff. So icon for everybody, we're able to intercept their basic. They've got walkie talkies. We have things that listen to walkie talkies. That's the making it simple. But yeah, you'd be like, hey, there's a guy right in the area where we at. Like, yeah, right by me. And then it would be impossible to find these guys. They were so
oh
good
yeah.
at hiding in plain sight. And then you maybe could find out where they were later, but there wasn't a damn thing you could do about it. A lot of the times they were very skilled at not getting killed. And when you did get an operation together to jump out somewhere with helicopters, Kiowas and Chinooks, that took so long. You had to get lucky to find them in that spot. And when you did, boy, hellacious firefights too. I don't want to take all your time. You've been great, and I love this. I love this conversation. The book for everybody is called "The Devil's Playground." It's right down there below. And as Andrew has said, the thing to remember is this valley has a lot of fights. So we're just talking about one window in time, one portion of that valley, but the entire thing is a complex battlefield. And like you were saying too, it's like the Olympics. If you want to go out and get into fights, here are the Americans. They will fight you. And so let's go out there and prosecute this battle and kind of almost take it to a stalemate, so that we don't actually get a win out of this thing. Anyhow, the fight is covered in the book. It's called The Devil's Playground. It's right down below in that link. Anything that you want to say in closing before we wrap this thing up?
I mean, for the guys out there who've been to combat and that are struggling, I would encourage you to reach out to the guys that you served with. I cannot describe how powerful the last 2 years have been getting back with the guys of Charlie Company 2nd Platoon. I mean, if you go to therapy or whatever and that works, the one-on-one, great, continue to do that. But I can understand if that doesn't work. And if you go to like group therapy, if that works for you, awesome, continue to do so. But I can understand how that can quickly become a dick measuring contest and it won't work. I think that like the best way to truly heal from something like traumatic is to do it with the people that experienced it with you. And that's the journey that Two Charlie's currently on, and more people are hopping on that boat. And I just encourage it with any guys out there that are, struggling with things that they did or saw or anything like that. There are organizations out there that will organize reunions. Reach out to those guys, or just take point yourself, and just start reaching out to your guys, seeing how they're doing, seeing where they're at.
I love it.
Yeah.
Okay, stand by. I'll be right back to you. Everybody else, we'll see you.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you so much for watching the Break It Down Show.